You are listening to the It's Logical podcast, Episode 5, Ghosts, Ghosts. Even the word itself has a mysterious and somewhat chilling ring to it. For centuries, humans across every culture have pondered the possibility of life after death, of spiritual entities that linger beyond their earthly existence. We wonder whether spirits remain behind for a higher purpose, or perhaps simply because they're stuck. Legends abound. Ghostly apparitions in darkened corridors, restless spirits haunting old mansions, phantom footsteps echoing at midnight. Most of these stories share a universal thread, an event or presence that defies immediate logical explanation and leaves the witness with a racing heart. Over time, ghostly legends have become a staple of folklore, religion, personal experience, and even pop culture. But how much of this is real, and how much springs from our own desire to believe there is something more lurking in the shadows? When discussing ghosts or spirits, it's important to acknowledge their dual nature in both the scientific and the spiritual communities. The scientific mind, driven by empirical data, looks for rational explanations, illusions, tricks of light, psychological phenomena, or memory distortions. On the other hand, the spiritual perspective embraces the unknown and often finds comfort in the belief that our loved ones, or other departed souls, remain close by. Many who claim to have encountered a ghost also describe profound emotional shifts or receive meaningful messages that resonate with their personal faith or experiences. Despite these contrasting viewpoints, one element that unites them is the deep human fascination with what lies beyond the boundary of our daily reality. Yet the debate continues. Are ghosts truly external entities in this world, or are they purely subjective projections of our minds, shaped by cultural beliefs and personal hopes, or fears? Attempts to document ghosts using equipment, such as electromagnetic field detectors, spirit boxes, or thermal cameras, have produced intriguing but inconclusive data. Often, unexplained recordings or images are written off as camera glitches, environmental anomalies, or even wishful thinking. At the same time, every so often something so inexplicable appears on the screen or in the audio, leaving even skeptics with raised eyebrows. In the midst of all this uncertainty, countless stories persist. Each telling and retelling evolves, weaving details of personal experiences, eyewitness accounts, and a dash of the unexplained into a tapestry that fascinates us collectively. For this exploration into the realm of the unknown, we step into the world of ghosts, both as a concept and as a deeply personal phenomenon. We examine why so many people believe in them, how cultural and psychological factors shape our understanding of hauntings, and the role logic and reason can, and arguably should, play when faced with seemingly supernatural occurrences. Anyone who claims they don't remember their childhood fears might be overlooking one of the most pivotal aspects of growing up, confronting the terrors that lurk in the darkness. For many, these terrors manifest as monsters under the bed, spooky silhouettes in the closet, or strange noises echoing through hallways at night. But for me, and perhaps for countless others, there was a moment in childhood when I sincerely believed I was staring at a ghostly apparition, and in that moment, every hair on my small body stood on end. I was a kid, nestled comfortably in bed after a long day of play and imagination. The house was quiet, the usual noises of an older home settling into the stillness of the late evening. Around midnight, I stirred. Some intangible force seemed to prod me awake, making my heart pound a little faster than usual. The hallway beyond my bedroom door was shrouded in darkness, but there was just enough moonlight leaking through a window to illuminate a shape, an unmistakable figure that hovered in the corridor. My immediate childlike reaction was pure terror. It wasn't just fear, it was visceral dread. My thumb, pressed tightly against my palm, quivered so obviously that I remember fixating on that detail. Even if I tried, I couldn't quite steady my trembling hands. It's amazing how quickly the mind races in these situations. In mere moments, I pictured everything from ghastly spirits longing for closure to malevolent entities that prey on unsuspecting children. The terror was overwhelming, but an odd memory surfaced amid that panic. Weeks earlier, one of my mom's friends had casually mentioned that if I ever saw a ghost or monster, I should face it because it's not real. And I needed to prove that to myself. Perhaps it was bravado, or maybe just a fierce desire to end the nightmare. Whatever the catalyst, I mustered the courage to swing my feet off the bed. My heart felt like it was lodged in my throat as I tiptoed toward the doorway. With each step, the looming figure seemed more imposing, a formless shape that embodied every ghost story I'd ever heard. My child's imagination went wild. I thought about ghostly moans, doors slamming of their own accord, phantom footsteps on the stairs, every cinematic cliché rolled into one. Yet, as I crept forward, that spark of logic deep within me kept whispering, "It might not be what you think it is." And then, as if the universe had orchestrated a grand reveal, I inched close enough for the moonlight to properly illuminate my ghost. There it was, a simple bathrobe belonging to my mother, hanging on the door. The belt was tied in such a way that it draped in a form almost reminiscent of arms, and the collar had gathered to form an eerie semblance of a head and shoulders. In that instant, the dread dissipated like air escaping a balloon. Relief washed over me and I laughed, a slight nervous laugh that felt more like a victory cry. All the swirling images of ghosts and monsters that had haunted my imagination vanished, replaced by the tangible reality of fabric and a wooden door. My mind, so eager to fill the darkness with fear, had crafted an entire scenario around an everyday object. The lesson struck me hard. Our imaginations are powerful forces that can either propel us to creative heights or steer us into deeply unsettling territory. Looking back, that memory serves as both a comedic anecdote, because, let's face it, who hasn't mistaken a coat on a hook or a robe on a door for something sinister at least once, and a profound commentary on the nature of our perceptions. It underscores how easily the brain can misinterpret sensory data, especially in low-light or high-stress situations. This inclination is rooted in human evolution, where seeing a lurking predator in the shadows, even if only imagined, was safer than ignoring a real threat. Our minds err on the side of caution, occasionally conjuring illusions that, in the modern world, manifest as ghosts or monsters. That night, courage and curiosity triumphed over fear, at least for a moment. It also planted the seed of skepticism in my mind. From that point on, whenever something went bump in the night or a shadow appeared in the corner of my eye, I reminded myself that sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. But as I would learn in adulthood, not all experiences are so easily chalked up to a trick of the mind. There are instances that happen later in life, when you think you've outgrown the boogeyman, that shake your convictions and make you wonder whether there might be more to reality than meets the eye. Fast forward about 15 years from my childhood. By then, I had long since traded my childlike fears for the responsibilities of adulthood, jobs, bills, relationships, and the usual hustle of daily life. It's not that I had forgotten the ghost in the hallway encounter, but the memory mostly served as a reminder to question my first impressions. Life was marching on when fate intervened through a family situation. My uncle, who had been seriously ill for a while, passed away in my aunt's home. After the funeral arrangements and emotional toll of saying goodbye, my aunt decided to transport his ashes to the East Coast. He was originally from there, and she felt it was only right to honor his wishes. Meanwhile, the house was left vacant, and it fell upon me to look after it for a short time until she returned. Staying alone in a familiar but suddenly very empty house can be disconcerting. The silence becomes louder, and every creak of the floorboards is more pronounced when there are no other voices or footsteps to offset it. Still, I shrugged it off, attributing most of my unease to the lingering heaviness of recent loss. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I had my routine: dinner, some late-night reading or television, then bed. Yet something happened on the third night that disturbed the smooth sailing of my calm, logical mind. It was early morning when I woke up. I glanced at my phone to check the time, somewhere around 6 a.m. The room felt strangely bright, and it took me a second to realize that light was coming from downstairs. Slowly I descended and found that every single light in the living area, kitchen, and hallway was on. Initially I laughed at myself. I must have left them on. Maybe I was half asleep when I went to bed. Though unusual for me to be so absent-minded, it seemed like the only logical explanation. Determined not to waste electricity or spook myself further, I made a mental note for the next night. Turn off all lights, double-check, and remember doing so. So I did exactly that. I turned off every switch, verifying that the house was dark. Before heading to bed, I even whispered aloud, "Lights off, house," as if to cement the memory. Then I climbed the stairs, read for a bit, and drifted off. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of déjà vu. Again, the entire ground floor was lit up like a movie set. The bright glow emanating from below startled me more this time. I was quite certain I hadn't just forgotten. I raced downstairs, my heart pounding a little more forcefully than I'd care to admit. Every switch was indeed flipped on. Logic took over. Maybe I'm sleepwalking. Maybe in my restless state, I'm unconsciously wandering downstairs and turning things on, oblivious to my own actions. It could be stress. There was a lot happening emotionally. My uncle's passing, being alone in a house filled with memories. The simplest explanation was that I was in a mild state of confusion, acting out in the night without recollection. Yet, a small, insistent part of me wanted to believe something else. What if my uncle, aware of my visual impairment, was leaving the lights on for me so I didn't stumble in the dark? I couldn't ignore that the timing was suspicious. Right after he passed, these strange occurrences began. There was a comforting logic to the idea that he was caring for me in some ghostly manner, ensuring I wouldn't hurt myself bumping into furniture. Here I was, torn between two possibilities: a rational, psychologically grounded explanation that I was simply doing this myself, and a more mystical, emotionally appealing notion that my uncle's spirit might be responsible. Ultimately, I never found a conclusive answer. When my aunt returned, I mentioned it to her. She smiled, tears welling up, and said, "He always worried about everyone, especially you because of your eyesight. Maybe he was just looking after you." Whether she genuinely believed that or was offering a comforting story, I'm still unsure. But the experience made me ponder how, even as we grow older and become more analytical, the pull of the unexplained can still tap into our deepest emotions and hopes. After all, if a ghost is real in your own subjective experience, if you're seeing, feeling, or otherwise perceiving evidence that something else might be there, does the objective reality matter all that much? Or is the meaning you derive from the experience more important than the reality itself? This question would send me down a rabbit hole of research into what ghosts represent for different cultures, how the human mind processes grief, and the paradoxical blend of logic and longing that emerges when someone we love crosses into the great unknown. The capacity of the human mind to imagine, interpret, and reinterpret what we perceive is staggeringly complex. We are not passive receivers of reality. Rather, our brains actively construct our experience of the world. This construction is shaped by inputs from our senses, our memories, our cultural conditioning, our emotional states, and even our deepest fears and desires. The difference between seeing a shadow and seeing a ghost can sometimes come down to nothing more than the context in which that shadow is perceived. Take, for instance, the phenomenon of pareidolia, a psychological inclination to see recognizable shapes, like faces, in vague or random stimuli. If you've ever looked at clouds and spotted the outline of a dog or a person, you've experienced pareidolia. In dimly lit rooms, or while scanning the darkness with heightened anxiety, our minds can quickly piece together a face or a figure from random patterns of light and shadow. This natural tendency once served our evolutionary ancestors well. Detecting a predator lurking behind foliage could be a matter of life or death, so the brain erred on the side of caution. Today, that same mechanism can make a coat rack look like a phantom intruder. Moreover, the strong emotions surrounding an event can drastically color our perception. In my childhood encounter, fear magnified a mundane object into a specter. In the case of my uncle's passing, the emotional weight of his recent death led me to see significance in the lights turning on, perhaps more than what was objectively warranted. This isn't to say that such experiences are invalid. Rather, it highlights how human perception is deeply intertwined with our emotional reality. there's a fine line between seeing is believing and believing is seeing. When people report ghostly visitations, they often describe heightened emotional states: fear, sadness, longing, or even joy at the idea of reuniting with a lost loved one can cast ordinary circumstances in an extraordinary glow. Was that gentle breeze on a still night truly a sign from a spirit, or just an unexpected draft from a slightly open window? If you're in a heightened state of grief, you might interpret it as the former. If you're staunchly skeptical, you'll likely interpret it as the latter, and never the twain shall meet. Cultural context adds another layer. In some parts of the world, visits from the departed are considered almost routine, woven into daily life and spiritual practice. Ancestor worship in certain Eastern cultures, for example, doesn't just expect ghosts or spirits, it honors them through rituals and offerings. In these communities, encountering a spirit may be greeted with reverence or acceptance, rather than fear. Meanwhile, in Western cultures shaped by horror films and the Christian conception of restless souls, ghostly encounters often come with a more ominous or suspenseful connotation. Our cultural narrative frames how we respond, whether we feel curiosity, terror, comfort, or a mix of all three. Beyond cultural and psychological factors, there's also the communal aspect of ghost stories. Legends told around campfires or horror movies watched with friends in dark living rooms can seed ideas in our minds about what a haunting should look and feel like. The flickering lights, the strange noises, the sense of a presence. When enough people share similar stories, an archetype forms. This archetype can strongly influence how we interpret unexplained events in our own lives. Yet one must also consider that the power of imagination doesn't automatically negate the possibility of genuine paranormal phenomena. It's tempting to adopt a purely reductionist approach and chalk everything up to illusions and cultural conditioning. But numerous people, from all walks of life, including sober-minded professionals like pilots, police officers, and soldiers, have reported events that defy easy explanation. Some speak of apparitions that appear in broad daylight, interactions with objects, or even verified accounts where a ghostly figure reveals information not previously known to the witness. Are all these accounts mere imagination or coincidences? As we explore the possibility of ghosts further, it's crucial to walk that tightrope between healthy skepticism and open-minded wonder. On one side lies the danger of gullibility, attributing every bump in the night to the paranormal. On the other side lurks the risk of cynicism, dismissing experiences that might contain deeper truths about the nature of consciousness, death, or reality itself. Ultimately, the point isn't to conclusively prove or disprove ghosts, but rather to understand why the belief persists, and why so many of us, rational though we may be, harbor a subtle thrill at the thought that ghosts might just be real after all. The belief in ghosts is older than recorded history. From the dawn of human consciousness, we've told stories of spirits that wander the earth after death. Early cave paintings suggest an awareness of a spiritual dimension, or at least a fear of forces beyond direct human control. Ancient civilizations like those in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece integrated ghosts into their religions and mythologies. Texts such as the Egyptian Book of the Dead delineate rituals for ensuring the safe passage of souls into the afterlife. The Greeks had their own underworld, populated by shades who could occasionally interact with the living, often to ask for propitiation or deliver dire warnings. In many traditions, ghosts are not necessarily malevolent. They might be protective ancestors, wise guides, or restless spirits in need of resolution. The concept of ghostly vengeance or evil apparitions emerges in certain cultural narratives, particularly those that emphasize moral lessons or cautionary tales. A ghost might haunt a murderer as a way of ensuring justice, or remain tethered to the site of a tragic event to warn others of the dangers lurking there. Over time, ghost stories took on forms as diverse as the cultures that birthed them. From the Chinese Hungry Ghost Festival, which provides offerings to appease wandering spirits, to the Day of the Dead celebrations in Mexico that joyously welcome departed relatives back into the fold, global customs demonstrate a wide array of attitudes toward the spirit realm. In medieval Europe, ghostly encounters were often interpreted through the lens of Christianity. Souls in purgatory were believed to occasionally return to seek prayers that would expedite their transition to heaven. Meanwhile, the Church cautioned that some spirits might be demonic in origin, attempting to mislead the faithful. This dichotomy between benevolent and malevolent ghosts persists in modern Western lore. With the advent of the Enlightenment, where reason and science began to dominate, belief in ghosts didn't simply vanish. Rather, it adapted. Seances, spirit photography, and spiritualist movements in the 19th century attempted to merge scientific curiosity with a desire to connect with the dead. Even famed scientists like Sir William Crookes investigated mediums, hoping to find empirical proof of an afterlife. Fast forward to our contemporary world, and ghosts remain a fixture in popular culture. Blockbuster films, best-selling novels, and popular reality TV shows showcase ghost hunts and paranormal investigations. Even with advances in psychology, neuroscience, and physics, the collective fascination endures. Part of the allure might be the romance of it all, the idea that love, guilt, or sheer willpower can transcend the boundary of death. Alternatively, the fascination may stem from the fear of mortality itself. Ghost stories offer a glimmer of hope that perhaps death is not the final curtain, that our consciousness may continue on in some ethereal form. In many indigenous cultures, the presence of ancestral spirits is accepted as a matter of course. These spirits play active roles in guiding the living, guarding sacred lands, and preserving cultural wisdom. For them, the boundary between the living and the dead is far more permeable, making ghost sightings or spiritual encounters a normal aspect of communal life. Such acceptance underscores how belief in ghosts is not always about fear. It can be a comforting reminder of continuity, communal identity, and ancestral heritage. Yet even within these diverse cultural frameworks, the question remains the same. Are these spirits actual entities with agency in the material world, or symbolic projections of shared values, fears, and hopes? Anthropologists like to point out that ghost stories and rituals often serve societal functions, reinforcing moral codes, preserving traditions, or offering therapeutic ways to cope with grief and loss. One might argue that if ghosts were purely imaginary, they wouldn't appear so consistently across cultures. On the other hand, one could also note that universal human experiences, love, fear, guilt, and grief, might naturally give rise to similar stories, even in societies isolated from one another. As you sift through these cultural narratives, a pattern emerges. Ghosts function as a bridge between the world of the living and the great beyond. Whether that bridge is real or metaphorical depends on your perspective. But one fact remains undeniable. The human imagination, shaped by a deep-rooted curiosity about life after death, continues to conjure spirits wherever we go. Despite their ubiquity in human culture, ghosts have proven elusive in scientific investigations. Over the years, researchers in parapsychology, a field that studies psychic phenomena and extrasensory experiences, have attempted controlled experiments to detect or measure ghostly presences. They've employed an array of tools, from thermal cameras to electromagnetic field, EMF detectors, infrared sensors, and digital voice recorders aimed at capturing electronic voice phenomena, EVPs. While some investigators claim compelling results, mainstream science remains unconvinced, citing a lack of replicable data and the strong likelihood of alternative explanations. Skeptics highlight psychological and neurological factors that could create the illusion of a ghostly presence. Sleep paralysis, for instance, can generate vivid hallucinations of shadowy figures or ominous presences pressing down on a paralyzed body. This phenomenon is well documented and arises from the incongruity between the mind and body during transitions in or out of REM sleep. Similarly, electromagnetic fields or infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that are often imperceptible to the human ear but can induce feelings of unease, might account for that haunted sensation in certain locations. Then there's the role of expectancy. If you enter a supposedly haunted house or location primed to witness something paranormal, your mind may magnify small, mundane occurrences, like a sudden draft or a flickering light bulb, into a ghostly encounter. Confirmation bias can lead you to perceive and remember experiences that validate your expectations, while you conveniently disregard or forget evidence to the contrary. This isn't merely a quirk of the overly credulous, it's a universal aspect of human cognition that everyone, including seasoned scientists, can fall victim to. Yet, being aware of these biases doesn't automatically negate the possibility of genuine anomalies. Some phenomena simply can't be easily replicated in laboratory conditions, because if ghosts exist, they might not oblige human demands for regular appearances. Anecdotal evidence, while not scientifically robust, is so vast and often so personally compelling that it cannot be dismissed out of hand. The challenge for scientists is to design experiments that can objectively capture elusive events without being undermined by placebo effects or hoaxes. Another angle under scientific scrutiny is the concept of consciousness and whether it could exist independently of the physical brain. If consciousness is purely an emergent property of brain function, then once the brain dies, consciousness should theoretically cease. However, if there's a dimension of consciousness that extends beyond physical matter, the notion of spirits persisting after death may not be so far-fetched. This line of inquiry touches on quantum physics, near-death experience research, and debates about the nature of reality itself. Despite all the research and theories, definitive proof remains elusive. This leaves ample room for personal interpretation. While traditional science calls for measurable, repeatable evidence to validate the existence of ghosts, spiritual or subjective experiences often defy such constraints. Thus, we find ourselves at an intersection of faith, anecdote, emotion, and empiricism. Each individual chooses where to stand on this spectrum based on personal experiences, cultural upbringing, and the frameworks of belief or disbelief they find most convincing. A factor often overlooked in academic discussions about ghosts is the profound emotional resonance tied to such experiences. Whether or not ghosts exist in an objective sense, they fulfill a deep-seated human desire to maintain connections, especially with loved ones who have passed on. When grappling with the finality of death, the idea of a spiritual visit can bring immeasurable comfort. It becomes a gentle reassurance that we're not entirely alone, that bonds of love might transcend the grave. For someone grieving, a flickering light or a familiar scent drifting through the house at odd hours can feel like a sign, an "I'm here" from beyond. Even skeptics might find solace, momentarily suspending disbelief to entertain the notion that their loved one's essence lingers. In hospice settings, patients nearing the end of life sometimes report seeing deceased relatives or speaking with them. While medical professionals often attribute this to hallucinations or the body's natural processes in shutting down, families frequently interpret these visions as proof of an afterlife, a comforting transition rather than a terrifying conclusion. This emotional dimension is crucial in understanding why ghost stories don't simply vanish in the face of scientific advancements. The longing for continuity, for a story that extends beyond mortal boundaries, is a powerful force. It isn't just about fear of the unknown, it's equally about hope. Ghosts represent possibility, a testament that something may persist where all evidence of biology suggests an end. That said, emotion can also lead us astray, clouding our ability to evaluate situations logically. Much like a child might be convinced that a bathrobe is a ghost, an adult's grief might inflate the significance of a mundane coincidence. Yet it's essential to note that illusions don't always equate to falsehood. A false vision, psychologically speaking, can still be profoundly true in its impact on someone's emotional healing. People regularly lean on symbolic gestures or comforting beliefs to cope with loss. Lighting a candle, placing a photograph on a mantle, talking aloud to the departed. Whether or not the person on the other side hears us, these actions help us navigate the choppy waters of bereavement. In the story of my uncle's lights, the comforting possibility was that he was looking out for me, knowing my difficulties with navigating darkness. That narrative, true or not, provided solace. It touched upon our close relationship and the ways he'd been supportive in life. So is it wrong to embrace that possibility if it offers healing? Perhaps not. human beings don't solely exist on the plane of cold logic. Our emotional and psychological needs are just as vital to our well-being. Ghost stories, in that sense, can serve a therapeutic function. They allow us to externalize feelings of loneliness, guilt, or longing. By envisioning a ghostly encounter, we create a space to express unspoken thoughts or to feel watched over. This emotional interplay doesn't prove or disprove the reality of ghosts, but it underscores why these stories remain so resonant, even in an era dominated by scientific rationalism. For those with religious or spiritual inclinations, ghosts might be part of a broader cosmological framework that includes angels, demons, ancestral spirits, or other non-physical entities. In this view, ghosts aren't anomalies to be explained away, but integral components of a universe alive with spiritual dimensions. Whether through prayer, meditation, or ritual, believers often seek to communicate with or assist these spirits, be it guiding them into the light, warding them off, or simply acknowledging their presence. In spiritual contexts, encounters with ghosts can be seen as signs or messages. The notion that a deceased loved one watches over us reflects a comforting narrative of continuity and divine orchestration. There are also accounts from mediums or psychic channels who claim to facilitate communication between the living and the departed, providing details or predictions that sometimes astonish those seeking counsel. Skeptics argue that cold reading and suggestive dialogue can account for these astonishing revelations, but believers counter that the specificity of the information defies simple trickery. Another perspective within spiritual circles involves energy fields. Some belief systems posit that all living beings generate an energetic imprint that doesn't simply vanish after death. This leftover energy might manifest as apparitions or as subtle influences on the environment, like inexplicable temperature drops or static-like sensations. This notion dovetails somewhat with scientific inquiries into consciousness, hypothesizing an unseen framework through which spiritual remnants might linger. Yet even within these interpretations, the experience of seeing a ghost or sensing a presence is intensely personal. It might align with established doctrines, but it can also be an individual revelation that reshapes someone's understanding of life and death. For example, a once skeptical person might encounter what they deem an undeniable sign from a deceased relative, prompting a spiritual awakening. Conversely, a lifelong believer might have a harrowing experience that challenges the benign, protective notions they once cherished, opening them to the idea that some spirits may be restless or even malevolent. Wherever one falls on the spectrum, be it stringent skepticism, open-minded curiosity, or firm belief, the role of personal interpretation cannot be overstated. Ultimately, ghosts stand at the crossroads of empirical inquiry and spiritual reflection. If they do exist, their reality might be interwoven with processes we do not yet understand. If they do not exist, then the human mind's capacity to conjure and share these experiences is a testament to our deep spiritual longing and narrative creativity. Either way, the conversation about ghosts extends far beyond whether or not they show up on a night vision camera. It touches on our interpretations of consciousness, morality, and the fabric of existence itself. One of the trickiest parts of discussing ghosts is navigating the seemingly contradictory domains of logic and wonder. Logic urges us to demand evidence, to probe every claim with critical analysis. We look for patterns, rule out coincidences, and test hypotheses under controlled conditions. Wonder, on the other hand, delights in the unknown. It thrives on the possibility that not everything can be dissected in a laboratory, that some mysteries remain beyond our current grasp. Historically, great discoveries have come from the balance between the two. If we relied solely on logic, we might miss out on innovative leaps. If we focused only on wonder, we'd risk being deceived by illusions or superstition. With ghosts, the line between the two often blurs. A perfectly rational person might still experience goosebumps in a reputedly haunted location. They might logically know that the mind can play tricks, yet still question whether something unseen truly occupies the space. This tension is evident in ghost hunting communities. A fraction of paranormal investigators are deeply committed to the scientific method. They meticulously log data, replicate experiments, and try to eliminate variables. Others embrace a more spiritual or intuitive approach, trusting their instincts or psychic impressions. The diversity within this subculture mirrors the broader debate in society about how best to handle phenomena that resist easy explanation. For many, the sweet spot lies in accepting that certain experiences may be unprovable, yet meaningful. You can analyze and question while still honoring the emotional or symbolic significance. This perspective resonates with the idea that not all truths must be empirical. Poetry, art, and certain aspects of human relationships often don't lend themselves to double-blind experiments, yet they hold profound truths about our existence. When I think back to my childhood ghost, my mother's bathrobe, and the later incident of the lights turning on in my uncle's house, I see two sides of the same coin. The first experience taught me the importance of scrutiny. The second revealed how potent emotional resonance can be. In one scenario, logic swiftly dispelled an illusion. In the other, logic coexisted with the possibility that something more was at play. Rather than dismissing one or the other entirely, I've come to appreciate the interplay. We can apply critical thinking to avoid being duped by every flicker of light, but we can also remain open to experiences that might hint at uncharted corners of reality. Ghosts will likely remain a fixture in human storytelling for as long as we walk the earth. They occupy a space that transcends mere superstition. They challenge our notions of life, death, and what might lie beyond. Whether you view them as illusions shaped by psychological processes, spiritual entities bound to a realm we can scarcely perceive, or a bit of both, their presence in our collective consciousness is undeniable. The personal tales shared here, one comedic in its resolution, the other tinted with emotional ambiguity, highlight the dual nature of ghostly encounters. They can be straightforwardly explained, or they can remain enigmas that stir our imagination. Often the outcome says as much about us as it does about the phenomenon. A child might conquer fear through curiosity, discovering that the monster in the darkness is just a bathrobe. An adult, grieving the loss of a loved one, might find solace in believing that a departed uncle is still offering protection by lighting the way. In the grand scheme of things, the question might not be whether ghosts objectively exist, but how these experiences shape us. Our interpretations, fueled by cultural lore, emotional undercurrents, spiritual beliefs, and logical reasoning, define the significance we assign to each encounter. Some people find closure and comfort in believing they've been visited by a loved one. Others find clarity in debunking illusions and attributing strange occurrences to the quirks of the human mind. What is certain is that ghosts, real or imagined, remain potent symbols of the unknown, reflecting our deepest anxieties and hopes. They serve as reminders that, despite all our technological advances and scientific progress, mysteries still loom. It's that lingering possibility that keeps us enthralled. Part of us may yearn for a tidy explanation. Another part might crave a brush with the inexplicable, a glimpse behind the veil that separates us from whatever comes after. And perhaps that is the gift of ghost stories. They open us to mystery. They encourage us to question, to explore, to keep an open mind while sharpening our critical thinking. They show us that there might be more out there than flesh and blood, whether that more is a spiritual essence roaming the halls or the vast capacities of our own imaginations. In the end, the hallmark of any great mystery is that it's never fully solved, and with ghosts, that sense of tantalizing uncertainty is part of their haunting allure.